It's about roaming. It's not Zerg play, it's about roaming in world versus world. Let's talk about first what criteria I think are important when it comes to roaming. And then I will talk about the tiers that I have here. So first of all, roaming, you can play every build. It's almost like my solo tier list that I did a while ago about solo content in PvE. You can play every build, and I think every build works to the most of the time. You can actually make the builds work. But of course, there are builds that are way better in most situations, and some builds are only working in a specific situation. So I'm valuing builds that are very, let's say, strong in almost every situation they encounter. So this is an S tier build for me. An S tier build is also for me if you can fight outnumbered, you can fight in small scale, but you can also do duels and one-on-ones and easily win them. So I think this is something that is the flexible part of a build, that you can fight it in different ways and make it work. Of course, if you have multiple builds that an elite spec has, I think that's also very valid to put it higher than if you just had one. Other than that, I would say it helps if you can kill people in a one-on-one, but if you, we will get to that, but for example, thieves struggle a lot with outnumbered situations, so they can be really annoying and can kill a lot of people in a one-on-one just by engaging and disengaging. But in outnumbered situations where, for example, they fight against 3 people, for them it's actually not that easy to outsmart them if the enemies are somewhat decent at the game, because they engage, and if the thief gets caught for 1 second, they might die to 3 people. So I think this is also taken into account. That's how the playstyle works in almost every situation. But like I said, again, I repeat it, this is a tier list, and I think every single spec that we have is playable in roaming. This is just my personal take on the situation, how I think roaming builds are, let's say, rated and how I would rate them. Let's talk about the tiers now. So like I said, S tier, very clear. This is broken builds, yeah? Builds that are just very, very good in every situation. Then we have A tier, which is also annoying tier. That are builds that are either annoying because they can win one-on-ones very easily, or are just not as good as an S tier build. So A and S, I would say, very good builds. B tier builds are for me builds that are definitely usable, but a step down between S and A tier builds. I would say B tier builds very good in some situations, but not as good overall. And then we have mediocre. I would say mediocre is the big part where I would say that's my personal take. I would put builds there that I would say I wouldn't use to roam, but I can see why people like them and they can work. And then we have that tier, which I would say is the trash tier for me. I would say some builds, even if you like them, I think they are just bad. If you play them, you will just struggle with them. You might have fun in 1 out of 100 one-on-ones, but oftentimes roaming is very obnoxious. A lot of builds have to be obnoxious to win. And if you don't play an obnoxious build, you will just lose. So I would say if you play a build that is in trash tier, you're making your life a big challenge in Guild Wars 2 roaming. I think Core Guardian roaming is mediocre. It's not trash, you can make it work. But for me, mediocre means that it is just worse than a lot of other options this class has. And I think roaming as a Core Guardian is just worse than roaming as a Willbender, roaming as a DH, or roaming as a Firebrand. For me, roaming as a Firebrand, for example, would be B tier. I think roaming as a Firebrand is not as good. Yeah, you can do it. It's in small scale, it's actually decent, but in solo scenarios, I wouldn't say it's that good. It's just not providing a lot of usefulness. It doesn't have that much crazy damage. It's probably played as a burning build, and it's just not as strong, I would say. It's better than a Core Guard in my opinion, because you have more utility baked into your tomes and stuff. But if you want to roam, I would say Willbender is a better option. Willbender could be in S tier if you want to just fight it in one-on-ones. I think in one-on-ones it's actually very okay if you can burst the enemy down and just pressure them. But in outnumbered situations, I feel like if you fight players that are somewhat decent at the game, they just deal too much damage to actually sustain it. That's why I would put it in annoying, because it's actually not that easy to kill enemies if they dodge your damage, if they apply weakness. I would say you have weaknesses, and therefore I would put it in A. And I think it's also quite annoying to fight a good Willbender, because they just deal so much damage, even after the nerfs in World vs. World. And then we have DH, which is also weird. I personally don't like DH roaming. This is my personal take. I would put DH in A tier, B tier rather, because I think DH is decent at roaming. you have nice traps, you can also kill people and have a nice block up time and stuff. But I personally think it's not the best roaming build, because having something stationary like traps just is not working too well in a big map open world scenario like roaming, yeah, where you run around a lot and you typically don't stand on a point like Conquest PvP. So that's why I would say, for me, that's B tier. But like I said, this is my personal take. And of course, let me know your comments on that as well. It's also very important. Warrior is in a weird spot, because Warrior has the first trash tier build in my opinion. I think Bladestone is trash tier. It got nerfed so hard that the Dragon Trigger hits for 5k maximum, and that's just for, you have to hit it still. So it's very hard to hit, and 5k as a reward is not that good. You don't stun it with it anymore. It's just not as good anymore. So for me, it's a trash tier build. I know there are some people that like this build, but I think it's just, if you fight anything that is above B tier, you will lose. You have to have such a skill gap to make it work. It's actually not funny anymore. The interesting part here is, I think Berserker would go into B tier for me as well. You will see a lot of builds for me go into B tier, because they are working what they want to do, but they just will lose against a similar skill player with an S tier build. So you can play it as a Condi or even a power build, but both of them are more duelists. They are not that strong in outnumbered situations. Yeah. The interesting part is you can also play a core warrior, and for me, core warrior would also go in low B tier. I think playing a core warrior works actually decently fine in roaming. You have very tankiness baked into your kit that makes it actually weigh. I think for me, this is decent. Yeah, you might be right there, Chaos Dawn. Maybe I'm a little bit too harsh in putting in an A tier, but I think it's not an S tier build for me. It's Berserker, for me, struggles in dealing a lot of damage. If you play a Conti-Circa and fight a build like some kind of Catalyst or something that has a lot of cleanses, you will never kill it. You know, you don't have enough damage pressure to be actually a threat to anyone. And I think it's oftentimes in World vs. World, if you fight a build, most of the time they are optimized for roaming and they have some Condi cleanses, and I think a Condi Circa in that way is actually easily dealable with. Yeah, that's just my take. Yeah, I think the damage on a Condi Circa is too low for the most part. That's why I would say in duels, yes, it's actually okay, but for me, it's a high B tier or low A tier. I think it's depending definitely on what you face. For example, if you face a Willbender that just used the Contemplation of Purity, then you are big damage dealer. But if you have someone that has a lot of cleanses, not so much, I would say. Yeah, and then you have Spellbreaker. Spellbreaker, I would say, is the same. Spellbreaker is actually a very, very good duelist for the most part, just because from its baseline design, from its baseline kit. But I personally think it's struggling a lot to deal enough damage in outnumbered situations to really pressure people. So I think you can play both of those warrior specs if you're warrior main, but I think warrior is not in a great spot when it comes to roaming. I think warrior needs a big help. I think you could make an argument Spear on Spellbreaker is actually decent as some kind of aggressive warrior, but I think you will get outnumbered and die too fast to make that actually work. Okay, that's just my take, like I said. Then we have Revenant. I think Core Revenant is trash tier, that much is for sure. I think it's just very bad. It was never designed in a way to be used alone. Then we have Vindicator. I think Vindicator is, for me, A tier. Maybe if you're playing very well, it's S tier, because it's a very good build. You have a lot of dodges, you have a lot of damage. You can actually make it very worthwhile. For me, it's annoying more than S tier, just because it's very hard to catch it. Yeah, because they have so many evades and stuff. It's really annoying to fight. So for me, S tier builds, maybe it's S tier. It depends a bit who you ask and when to play. I think for me, it's A tier. It's a good build for sure. Then we have Herald. For me, Herald is sadly not as good as it once was. For me, Herald is B tier. I think Herald works and is decent. It has nice Condi damage. You can play it as a power build. The power build, I would say, is higher. The power build is probably an A tier. Just plays exactly the same as Willbender. Maybe is a little bit stronger if you can play it. It has a higher skill ceiling, but it's also very squishy, which makes it really hard in outnumbered situations. So I think in outnumbered situations, Vindicator is better than Herald, but Herald in 1-on-1s can be really, really strong. You have so much burst damage. So Power Herald here, Condi Herald in B tier. And then we have Renegade. I have to be honest, I don't see a lot of Renegades. I think Renegade is a decent build, but I would say I would put it in B tier just because it's not as good as the other two, for sure, in my opinion. It's not as good as it once was, for sure. Okay, let's go to medium armor classes. So medium is interesting. Let's start with Thief. Thief is very easy for me. I would put Daredevil, Deadeye in annoying tier, and just because they are, for me, annoying, and they can be really strong in a 1-on-1 because they can stealth and disengage and engage whenever they want to, but I think they are not as good in outnumbered situations to make them actually in S tier. I think you can make an argument for actually playing Core Thief because it's also playable with X on something, and this can also be very annoying to fight. I would put it in low B tier for that. I think it struggles a little bit with the sustained DPS for the most part. I don't know. I think those are a little bit better than Core Thief. And then we have Spectre. I think Spectre is just not as good for roaming as it once was. It is decent if you have a small scale group and you can play as a support, but I'm talking here more about how solo roaming works. So I think if you don't have friends, I would put it in B tier. If you have friends, maybe low A tier, because you can support them so easily. But I would say for me, Spectre is also B tier. Then we have Engineer. Engineer is the first spec where I would say you have very, very good specs in there. I'm personally not a big fan of Mechanist. I think Mechanist is for me mediocre. I know a lot of people actually like Mechanist, but I think the controllable pet is not as good as you really need it to be to make it work. And you can actually just survive the condi pressure or something and then you burst them. I think they are not as strong anymore. They are carried by the signet, shift signet, and therefore I would say it's not broken. I think a core engineer is actually for me annoying as well. I think with Spear they are actually very decent. They have a very strong build and just very good build in general. Then we have Holosmith and Scrapper. So you can play both of them really aggressive or can play Scrapper a little bit defensive. And I would say Scrapper for me is a very strong pick that I would say not a lot of people actually play, at least on EU. But I think it's a very good pick. I think it's for me A tier. And Holosmith, I would say, for me Holosmith is not as strong as Scrapper just because it is not as survivable. You are very bursty and that is very good in roaming, but you can't survive that easily. So I would say for me it's a B tier build too. So I think Engineer has a overall very good specs when it comes to roaming. But I think it shines more in Zerg play. But we're not talking about Zerg play here. Okay, let's talk about Ranger next. So I think Ranger is the first S tier build. Untamed is an S tier roamer. You can play it as a condi, as a hybrid, as a power build. There are so many options. Spear is actually really strong as well. It's just a very strong build. Untamed, first S tier build for me. Very, very flexible and extremely strong if you can play it. You have a lot of buttons, yes, but if you know what you're doing, it's very, very good. On the other hand, I would say Druid is just very tanky. It's nice in small scale roaming, but for someone that is solo roaming, I think Druid is just annoying. It is really annoying how tanky it is, how much stealth access it had, and how much content it can put out. But I would say it's here for the annoyingness, not for how strong it is. Yeah, I think it's just very tanky. You can win 1-on-1s with that build, but in outnumbered situations, you are just annoying. You're not really strong. Core Ranger, I would say, is mediocre. I would say you can play it, for sure. But I would say, why are you playing Core Ranger if you have the option of Untamed? Or even Soul Beast. I think even Soul Beast is for me a decent roamer. It is probably not as strong as Untamed, for sure, actually not. But in my opinion, why would you play a Core Ranger if you have the most broken specs that are available to you with Untamed? And even Soul Beast, I would say, is a very good roamer. You can play the power or hybrid or condi version. There are actually a lot of builds for Soul Beast as well. I think for me, Soul Beast is not as good as Untamed, but still very good. Yeah, like I said, I think I agree with you that Sword Warhorn on Druid is very annoying, but I would say it's not extremely strong. For example, I would say a Vindicator is very annoying, but you can also lose to a Vindicator. And fighting a Druid with Warhorn and Sword, it's just very tanky. But if you somewhat have some sustain in your build, you actually will probably not lose to it. It's just very annoying to fight. So I would say it's for the annoyingness in A tier. I don't see the damage of a druid being so high that I instantly die to it. Yeah. But with Mace, maybe you have enough damage or CC that you kill someone. So A tier deserved. So I would say Scourge for roaming. I have to be honest, I never see a Scourge roaming. I think Scourge for roaming is not as good, especially with all the Zerg nerfs. They also affect the roaming. So I would say it's, for me, it's just not that good. Yeah. I don't know. I think it's mediocre. You can play it. It's probably better than Trash tier, but it's actually not that good, I would say. There was once a time with Tormenting Rune to make it work very well, actually, but now it's not that good anymore. I would say core Necromancer, in my opinion, is actually in B tier. I think it's a decent build, but if you play Necromancer, I would rather go for Reaper Harbinger. I think core Necro is just tanky and too slow to actually make it work. You can use swords, but I think Harbinger S tier for me. Very, very good. You can play Celestial, you can play Power. I think they are both really, really good. I think it's the best option. Yeah. I think they are all very, very decent to play as a Harbinger is very good in roaming right now. Even after the Celestial nerfs, you are probably one of the best user of Celestial stats. It's very, very good. And then you have Reaper. Reaper is interesting. I think Reaper is either high A tier or even S tier. I think it depends who you ask. I would say it's A tier. I would agree. I think it's too. If you fight on Harbinger, you will lose, and Untamed you can't find at all. So I think it's for me somewhere in high A tier. Yeah, it's not S tier. Yeah. So I agree. I think it's S tier. It's not as good, but yeah, I agree. It can be really annoying if you fight a really tanky Reaper with double health bar, full shroud. Makes it really annoying to fight. But I think the cool part is here, they will drop out at some point, even if you don't kill the shroud, so to say, and you can still kill them afterwards because they have a 9-second cooldown on the shroud. So I think it's actually a decent build to fight because they might have to leave shroud at some point. Yeah, but I get what you mean. Okay, let's talk about the Elementalist. Yeah, what can I say? You can play some kind of Fire Weaver, which is actually very good in evades and how much damage it actually can put out. But, and that's the big but, you don't have stability access. And this is really annoying. If you can't play against anything that CCs you, you have a bad time because all the builds in A and S tier CC like crazy. I think for me it's a low B tier build. Maybe it's mediocre because the stability is just lacking. You get killed so easily. I think if Weaver had stability, I would say Weaver would go in high B tier, maybe in low A tier, just because it's very decent, but it doesn't have stability. And that's really bad. Yeah, you just have Armor of Earth and that's it. Just not good enough. Core Elementalist, I would say, also mediocre. It's not as good. You have Catalyst and Tempest, and why would you pick a Core Elementalist? It's playable, but it's not very good. Then you have Tempest. For me, Tempest is B tier. I think Tempest is not as good as the A tier builds. You can very much play it. But really playing a Dagger Warhorn or a Dagger or Warhorn Scepter build, is it really, can you kill someone with that? I don't know. Would you play a Warhorn with Weaver? I don't know. I think yes, you can kill them because you have damage, but would you survive against them if they are somewhat tanky and can punch you back? I don't know. I think for me, those two, I think Catalyst is S tier. Yeah, I think Catalyst, you can play everything on Catalyst, every single weapon, and it works. I think Catalyst is very strong. Yes, okay, yeah, you're right there. I think Weaver, as a Fresh Air Weaver, I think Fresh Air Weaver is actually decent, yeah. You're right there, with a Scepter, Fresh Air Weaver, Scepter Focus, I think this is actually a decent build. I'm not sure, maybe I put it in Annoying, actually, because if you play it well, I fought one just a week ago or something, they have a lot of invulnerability and just a lot of super speed. So in one-on-ones, they're actually decent, but in outnumbered situations, they are not that good. So I think they are somewhat like Condi Circa. They are decent in the right scenario, but in some scenarios, they just can't do anything. Yeah. But Fresh Air Catalyst is just better. I don't know why would you play a Weaver? I don't know. I would totally agree with you, Chaos. I think that doesn't make sense to actually play something that is just mediocre in contrast to Catalyst. Catalyst is absolutely broken in my opinion. If you can play any weapon on this spec, I think something like the spec is broken. You can play a power variant, you can play a celestial variant. I think if you wanted to go for it, you can also go for Condi. It works. I don't know. It's just a broken spec. I think those three specs, if you encounter them, if you're not fighting, if you're not playing them yourself, you have a hard time. They are just very, very good. Okay, let's now talk about Mesmer. I think Mesmer is in a weird spot because Mesmer, you can play all specs, but they are somewhat limited in what they can do, because if you play power, you have to play spear. It's the best option by far. It's so good. Greatsword and spear, best weapons they can play. So I think Chronomancer for me is B tier. I think it's not as good as it once was. It's overshadowed by a power mirage, which I would put into A tier. You can also play a Condi Mirage. It's also very annoying to fight. I think it is not as strong as the S tier builds for sure. You lack a lot of just sustain in your kit, but it's definitely annoying to fight. If you fight a good Mirage, it's a tough time. Core Mesmer, I'm not so sure. I know there are some streamers that actually play Core Mesmer, but I'm not sure if Core Mesmer is really a build that I would say is very good. I think you can play it, you can make it work, but why would you play something that is inferior to, for example, Mirage or Wurtz? So I would say for me it's low B tier. You can play it, but I don't. It's not as good. And then you have Wurtz, which is interesting. I think Wurtz you can play a Condi, a Celestial build, a Power build. All of them are actually very decent. I wouldn't say they're S tier because you can kill them. They are just very annoying to fight. For me, they're definitely in A tier because they have so many blocks, so many evades, so many invulnerabilities that they can chain together. It's just very annoying to fight a Wurtz, and they actually have a lot of damage as well. You can Confusion Spike someone, you can just Power Spike someone. They are overall a very good spec in my opinion. But it's not, in my opinion, deserving to go into S tier because you still lack the flexibility of the S tier builds. Mirage versus Virtuoso, who you got? I think that's such a skill matchup because the Mirage has potentially more damage. If the Wurtz is not reacting in time, or if they are similar skilled, I think it's very, very not luck based, but you know, the person that misses a frame will die just because the spike of each other's damage will kill you. So you have to, this is really volatile, this matchup. So I would say both of them very strong. Depends a bit what you want to play more. I think this is more Mesmery. This is a little bit more, feels like an Elementalist a little bit because you have more casts, you have more, I don't know, more magic. This is a little bit more like a Thief. So more Mesmery, you dodge a lot, you evade. So I think, I don't know. I think Virtuoso can be dealt with if you have Reflects or if you have something like that. But if they use the unblockable trait, you look really bad because they will just ignore your magnetic aura. So I don't know. I think Mirage, I think it's like I said, it's really skill dependent. For some people, for me, for example, I'm not a big Wurtz fan in competitive modes because I don't like the cast time on your F skills and that you have to face your enemy. That's why I would say Mirage for me is better, but I think it's very squishy. If you don't like the squishy playstyle, then Wurtz is better because you have more invulnerability. I don't know. I think both have their advantages and disadvantages, but like I said, I think they will not compete against the top three, which are Untamed, Harbinger, and Catalyst. And I think that's my conclusion. I think roaming currently, you can play a lot of builds that are actually decent in A and B tier. They are actually very good builds around that you can play. But as soon as you face an S tier build, you will notice the difference. Yeah, that someone that is actually not as skilled as you might kill you or might at least pressure you way more than is deserving to because they play those three broken builds. Just my take, but I think a lot of people would agree with me there. Let me know your takes here in the comments and in the chat, because I think this is very personal. I think it depends, of course, what you play. I try to play a lot of roaming builds, so I get a bit more broad picture here, but I think it depends heavily on what kind of maybe players you encounter, what kind of playstyle you yourself play. I think it's roaming is very hard to actually say, don't play this, it's very bad, because in some situations you will die to a Condi Circle, even though it's in B tier. But if you, for example, play, I don't know, an Untamed, you will probably not die to a Condi Circle. Just saying. You are right there that you can play a lot of Catalyst builds that are not that easy, but I would say Hammer Catalyst, Dagger Catalyst, Signet Catalyst, they are, if you put a little bit of effort in, actually not that hard to play. Especially Signet Catalyst is quite easy. But I don't know. I think if you face, for example, a Power Harp on a Hammer Cutter, this is a very skill matchup. You can win this, but you can also lose it. I don't know. I think Cutter overall is just very, very strong. I think X-Thief, I have to be honest with you, Wraith, I would agree. X-Daredevil, I fought them so often, they are very annoying to fight in one-on-ones. But, and that's the big part, I would put them in S tier if they would be able to win outnumbered situations easily, or at least deal with them. But the only way that they can deal with them is either run away in stealth, or just kill one person, then disengage and kill another person. And I think this is not very S tier deserving, because for example, if you would play an Untamed, you would just kill them straight up in a 1v3. And the Daredevil would just kill one person, run away, get cooldowns, run back in, and kill another person. And I think this is therefore a little bit worse, because your build is not as strong as someone that just can deal straight out with those people. I hope you enjoyed this quick tier list. If you did, be sure to leave a like. And if you're a tier list enjoyer such as me, don't forget to subscribe for more tier lists and more Guild Wars 2 content in the future. Thanks for watching. Thanks to all my supporters on YouTube, Twitch, and Patreon. Thanks Lane. Thanks Malice. And I hope to see you all in the next video.